I would give anything for some good meat skewers from a street stall. Maomao looked up at the overcast sky and sighed. She lived in a world that was both a place of unparalleled sparkling beauty and a noxious, foul, suffocating cage. 3 months had already passed. She hoped her old man was eating properly. It seemed like just the other day she had gone into the woods to gather herbs. There she met 3 kidnappers. Let us call them villagers 1, 2, and 3. They were seeking women for the royal palace. Their marriage proposal was quite forceful and unpleasant. She would be compensated for her work. With a couple of years of service, there was hope she might return to her hometown. There were worse ways to earn a living if one went to the royal city of their own accord. But Maomao, who had been doing just fine as an apothecary, thank you very much, saw it as so much trouble. What did the kidnappers do with the young women they captured? Sometimes they sold the girls to the eunuchs, using the money for a night of drinking. Sometimes young ladies were offered instead of someone's own daughter. For Maomao it was not an important question. She found herself caught up in their schemes no matter the reason. Otherwise she would never have wished to have anything to do with the Haogong, the rear palace. It was the residence of the imperial women. The place was thick with the odours of makeup and perfume, almost turning the stomach. It was also full of the thin, forced smiles of the court ladies in their beautiful dresses. During her time as an apothecary, Maomao had come to believe there was no toxin as terrifying as a woman's smile. This rule held true whether in the halls of the most ornate palace or in the squalid chambers of the cheapest pleasure house. Maomao lifted the laundry basket at her feet and headed into a nearby building. The courtyard behind the dazzling front faradere was dreary. It housed flagstone-paved washing areas where the court servants did laundry by the armload. These servants were neither quite men nor quite women. Men were generally not allowed in the rear palace. The only men who could enter were either members and blood relations of the most noble family in the country, or former men who had lost a very important part of themselves. Of course, all the men Maomao was looking at right now were the latter. She thought it was twisted, but it was admittedly a logical thing to do. She set down her basket and spotted another one sitting in the next building over. It was not dirty clothes, but clean laundry that had dried in the sun. She glanced at the wooden tag dangling from the handle. It bore an illustration of a leaf and a number. Not all of the palace women were literate, which wasn't surprising. Some of them had been brought here by force after all. They had been taught the basics of etiquette before they arrived, but not letter writing. Maomao thought it would be fortunate if even half of the girls taken from the countryside knew how to read. It was a hazard, one might say, of the rear palace becoming too populous. Quality was being sacrificed for quantity. Although it did not equal the flower garden of the former emperor, the consorts and ladies in waiting together numbered 2,000 people. With the eunuchs, that number came to 3,000. It was a vast place indeed. Maomao was a serving girl, a post so lowly she didn't even have an official rank. What more could she expect? She was a girl who had no one to back her at court. She had arrived at the palace by way of kidnappers to fill out the palace staff. If she had a body as shapely as a peony, or skin as pale as the full moon, she might have aspired to be one of the lower concubines. But Maomao possessed only ruddy, freckled skin and limbs that looked like withered branches. I need to just get this job done, she thought. Maomao picked up the basket with its tag depicting a plum flower and the number 17. She then trundled off as quickly as she could manage. She wanted to return to her room before the frowning sky began to weep. The owner of the laundry in the basket was one of the low-ranked consorts. Her room was rather more lavish than those given to the other low consorts. In fact, it was downright ostentatious. Maomao thought the woman must be the daughter of a wealthy noble family. When a woman received a palace rank, she was allowed her own ladies in waiting. A minor consort could have only 2 ladies at most. This is why Maomao, a serving girl without a mistress to attend, was carrying the woman's laundry. A low consort was permitted personal rooms in the rear palace precincts. However, these rooms were usually on the edges of the grounds, where the imperial eye was unlikely to fall upon her. If she was fortunate enough to spend a night with His Majesty, she would be given new rooms. A second night with him meant she had truly found her place in the world. Those who never captured the emperor's interest could expect to be demoted after a certain age. This was true for a consort, unless her family held particular influence. She might even be given as a wife to someone in the bureaucracy. Whether that was a blessing or a curse depended on who received it. The women feared most being given to one of the eunuchs. Maomao knocked gently on the door. A lady in waiting opened it and said sharply, "Just leave it there." Inside, a consort smelling of the sweetest perfume was drinking alcohol from a cup. She was likely very admired for her beauty in those peaceful days before she came to the palace. However, once she arrived, she realized she knew as much about the outside world as a frog that had lived its entire life in a well. Surrounded by the many dazzling flowers in this garden, she had lost her will to continue fighting for a place here. Recently, she had stopped leaving her room altogether. No one is going to come visit you in your own room, right? Maomao traded the basket she held for the one sitting outside the door and returned to the laundry area. There was still so much work to do. She had not come to the palace of her own volition, but they were at least paying her. She intended to earn her keep. Maomao the apothecary was diligent-minded if nothing else. If she kept her head down and did her job, she could hope to leave this place someday. She assumed she might even gain royal notice. Sadly, Maomao's thinking was, let us say, naïve. She did not know what was going to happen. No one does, that is the nature of life. Maomao was a relatively objective thinker for a girl of 17, but she had a few qualities that continually dogged her. For one, curiosity, and for another, a hunger for knowledge. Then there was her budding sense of justice. A few days from then, Maomao would uncover a mysterious and terrible truth concerning the deaths of several infants in the rear palace. Some said it was a curse laid upon any concubine who dared to produce an heir, but Maomao refused to regard the matter as anything supernatural. Chapter 2. The two consorts. So it's true. It is. She said she saw the doctor go into their rooms with her own eyes. Maomao sipped her soup and listened. Hundreds of serving girls were having their breakfast in the vast dining room. Their meal consisted of soup and a porridge made of mixed grains. She was listening to two women who were sitting diagonally across from her as they traded gossip. The women tried to look chagrined about the story, but an unseemly curiosity lit their eyes. He visited both Lady Jyokayu and Lady Lihua. Gracious, both of them. But they are only 6 months and 3 months, aren't they? That's right. Maybe it really is a curse. These names belonged to the Emperor's 2 favorite consorts. 6 months and 3 months were the ages of the lady's children. Rumors were rife throughout the palace. Some of these stories came from dislike of His Majesty's companions and the children they had with him. But others felt more like traditional ghost stories, the kind people told during hot, slow summers to cool down by frightening each other. It had to be true. Otherwise, why would 3 separate children have died? All of the offspring in question had been born to consorts. This means they could, in principle, have been heirs to the throne. One of the poor victims had been born to His Majesty before his accession, while he still lived in the Eastern Palace. 2 more were born since he had assumed the throne. However, all 3 had passed away in infancy. It was common for infants to die, but it was strange that 3 of the Emperor's own children had died so young. Only 2 children remained, those of the consorts Jyokayu and Lihua. Perhaps poisonings, Maomao mused while sipping her porridge. However, she concluded it could not be. After all, 2 of the 3 dead children were girls. In a land where only men could inherit the throne, what reason was there to murder princesses? The women across from Maomao were so busy talking about curses and hexes that they had stopped eating completely. But there is no such thing as curses, Maomao thought. It was stupid, that was the only word for it. How could you destroy an entire clan with one curse? These questions bordered on being heretical, but Maomao's expertise, she felt, constituted proof of this. Could it have been some kind of sickness? Perhaps it was something blood-borne. How exactly did they die? That was when the detached, quiet maid began talking to her chatty dining companions. Maomao would not be long regretting succumbing to her curiosity. I don't know the whole story, but I heard they all wasted away. Apparently inspired by Maomao's show of interest, Xiaolan, the talkative maid, thereafter regularly brought her the latest rumors. The doctor has visited Lady Lihua more frequently than Lady Jyokayu, so I believe Lady Lihua is sicker. She wiped a window frame with a rag as she spoke. Is it Lady Lihua herself? Yes, it is both mother and child. Maomao thought the doctor likely paid closer attention to Lady Lihua not necessarily because she was more ill, but because her child was a little prince. Consort Gyokao had borne a princess. The imperial affection fell more upon Gyokao, but when one child was a boy and the other a girl, it was clear which one should receive preferential treatment. Like I said, I don't know everything, but I've heard she has headaches and stomachaches and even some nausea. Satisfied that she had divulged all her newest gleanings, Xiaolan busied herself with another task. As a thank you, Maomao gave her some tea flavoured with licorice. She made it with herbs that grew in a corner of the central garden. The tea smelled strongly medicinal, but it was actually quite sweet. Xiaolan was thrilled. Serving girls did not have many opportunities to enjoy sweet things. She had a headache, a stomachache, and felt nauseous. Maomao had some ideas about what illnesses these might mean, but she could not be sure. Her father had often told her not to base her thinking on assumptions. Maybe she would just pay her a little visit. Maomao was determined to finish her work as quickly as possible. The rear palace was a vast place. It housed more than 2,000 women and 500 eunuchs. Lowly workers like Maomao slept 10 to a room. However, the lower-ranked consorts had their own chambers. Mid-ranking consorts had whole buildings to themselves. The highest-ranking consorts virtually had their own palaces. These sprawling complexes included dining halls and gardens. They were large enough to dwarf a small town. Maomao rarely left the eastern quarter where she lived. There was no need to do so. She had neither the time nor the means to leave unless she was sent on an errand. She thought to herself, if I don't have an errand, I'll just have to make one. Then, Maomao spoke to a woman who was holding a basket. This basket contained fine silk. It would have to be washed in the laundry area in the western quarter. No one seemed to know what made the water different there, or if it was the people who did the washing. But the silk would soon be ruined if handled here in the eastern quarter. Maomao understood that silk degraded more or less depending on whether it was dried in the sun or kept in the shade. She felt no particular need to tell anybody that. I'm just dying to get a look at that gorgeous eunuch they say lives in the central area, Maomao said. She invoked one of the other rumours Xiaolan had mentioned in passing, and the woman gladly gave her the basket. Opportunities for anything like romance were rare in this place. Because of this, even the eunuchs, men who were not fully men, became objects of affection. People told stories occasionally about women who married eunuchs after they finished serving in the palace. Perhaps this was all healthier than the women desiring each other, but it still puzzled Maomao. She wondered if she would end up like everyone else one day. She crossed her arms and grunted. Romantic matters held little interest for her. She delivered the basket of laundry as quickly as she could, and then a red lacquered building in the central area came into view. Carvings were everywhere. Every pillar looked like a work of art. Each detail had been carefully considered. The overall effect was more refined than anything found on the edges of the eastern quarter. Currently, the largest quarters in the rear palace were occupied by Consort Lihua, the mother of the prince. The emperor did not have an empress, which made Lihua, the only one of his women with a son, the most powerful person here. The scene Maomao discovered looked almost as if it had come from the city itself. One woman fulminated, another hung her head in gloom, while others fussed and fretted. A man tried to make peace among them all. It is hardly different from a brothel, Maomao thought. This was a cold observation, made possible by her status as a third party, or even a Gawker. The upset woman was the most powerful person in the rear palace. The one hanging her head was the next most powerful, and the fussy women were attendants. The man intervening was the doctor. Maomao gathered this from the whispering she heard and the general state of things around her. The first woman was Consort Lihua, mother of the imperial prince. The second woman was Consort Gyokao, blessed with a daughter, though not quite as blessed as Lihua. As for the eunuch doctor, Maomao knew nothing about him. She had heard that in this whole great palace there was only one person who could truly be called a practitioner of medicine. "This is your doing," she said. "Just because you had a girl, you got it into your head to curse my prince to death. A beautiful face distorted by anger is a frightful thing." Eyes filled with a furious light like a demon's stared at the beautiful Gyukayu. Her face was as pale as a ghost's. Gyukayu held a hand to her cheek. Maomao guessed there was a red mark under her fingers, as if she had been slapped with an open hand. That isn't true, and you know it. My Zyrolling is suffering just as much as your son. The second woman had red hair and eyes the color of jade. She answered the charges calmly, referring to the young Princess Lingli by an affectionate nickname. Consort Gyukayu's looks suggested she had a good deal of Western blood in her veins. Now she raised her head and glared at the doctor. And that is why I request that you not neglect to attend to my daughter as well. It seemed the doctor himself was the reason intercession had been needed between the two women. He had been spending all his time looking at the young prince. Gyukayu was appealing on behalf of her daughter. One sympathized with her, but this was the rear palace. Male children were more prized than female ones. The doctor seemed caught between making an excuse and being completely speechless. What a knave that Sorbon's was, Maomao thought, to fail to notice the two consorts right in front of him. How could he not have figured it out already? The dead infants, the headaches, the stomach pains, and the nausea. Consort Lihua also had a ghostly pallor and frail appearance. Maomao muttered to herself, putting the raucous scene behind her. She thought, I need something to write on. She was so busy thinking this, she didn't even notice the person passing by. Chapter 3. Jinchi there at it again, Jinchi muttered glumly to himself. It was unseemly how the blossoms of the palace sometimes carried on. It fell to Jinchi, as one of his many responsibilities, to quiet things down. As he waded into the crowd, Jinchi saw one person walking along as if the uproar didn't concern her. She was a petite girl with freckles on her nose and cheeks. There was nothing else particularly distinctive about her, except that she paid no heed to Jinchi as she walked along muttering to herself. That could well have been the end of the story. It was not quite a month later when word spread that the young prince had died. Consort Lihua was consumed with weeping, and was thinner now than ever. She no longer looked like the woman who had once been considered the blooming rose of the court. Perhaps she had the same illness as her son, or perhaps it was a spiritual affliction that troubled her. Regardless, she did not expect to have another child in such a condition. Princess Lingli, the half-sister of the deceased prince, quickly recovered from her illness. She and her mother became a great comfort to the bereaved emperor. It certainly seemed likely that Consort Gyukayu would soon have another child, considering how often His Majesty visited her. The prince and princess had both been sick with the same mysterious illness. However, one of them recovered while the other died. Could the difference in their ages be the reason? 3 months had passed, and that was a significant time for an infant's resilience. What about Lihua? If the princess had recovered, then the consort should be able to recover as well. Perhaps she was suffering mostly from the psychological shock of losing her son. Jinchi turned these thoughts over in his head as he reviewed some paperwork. He pressed his chop to it. If there was any difference between the two children, perhaps it lay with Consort Gyukayu. I'm going out for a while, Jinchi said as he stamped the final page with his chop. He promptly left the room. The princess smiled at him with all the innocence a child could muster. Her cheeks were as full and rosy as steamed buns. Her tiny hand clasped into a fist around Jinchi's finger. No, child, let him go, her mother scolded gently. She was a red-haired beauty. She wrapped the infant in swaddling clothes and put her down to sleep in her crib. The princess, apparently too warm, kicked the coverings off and lay watching the visitor, gurgling happily. I presume you wish to ask me something, said the consort. She was always a perceptive woman. Jinchi got right to the point. Why did the princess recover her health? Consort Gyukayu allowed herself a small smile before pulling a piece of cloth from a pouch. The cloth had been torn off of something and was adorned with ungainly characters. The handwriting was uneven, and the message appeared to have been written using grass stains. In places it was faded and difficult to read. The message said, "Your face powder is poison. Do not let it touch the baby." Perhaps the faltering quality of the handwriting was deliberate. Jinchi cocked his head. "Your face powder, yes," Gyukayu said. She entrusted the child in the crib to a wet nurse and opened a drawer. She took out something wrapped in cloth. It was a ceramic vessel. She opened the lid and a puff of white powder emerged. This, the very same. Perhaps Jinchi conjectured there was something in the powder. He remembered that Gyukai already had pale skin, which was highly prized at court. She did not need to use powder to make herself more beautiful. Consort Lihua, however, looked quite sallow. She used more powder every day to conceal her condition. My little princess is quite a hungry girl, Gyukai said. I do not make enough milk for her, so I hired a nurse to help. Sometimes mothers whose children had died shortly after birth found work as wet nurses. This face powder belonged to that woman. She favored it because she felt it was whiter than other powders. And where is this nurse now? She took ill, so I dismissed her. With plenty of funds to support herself naturally. She spoke like a woman who was intelligent and perhaps a little too kind. So let us say there was some kind of poison in the face powder. If the mother used it, it would affect the child. If whatever was in the powder got into the mother's milk, it might even end up in the child's body.